Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your days to join us for what I know is going to be a great conversation. So last year, one of our, what we've been calling COVID keepers, so things that were created out of necessity as a result of the pandemic, was that we began this quarterly series of Zoom events designed to give honors families insight into different elements of the university. And today I'm super excited to have Tom DeLuca, who's the Dean of the College of Forestry here at OSU, to share a bit about the exciting work that is happening in the College of Forestry, contributing to OSU's goal of creating a healthy planet. Before we start the program, I do want to acknowledge that Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or the Ampinafu Band of the Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. As you may have noticed, we're recording the presentation today, but we'll edit the final video to remove any identifying information about guests before sharing or posting. We have some families that were very interested in the topic and unable to attend today due to scheduling conflicts. Finally, after Dean DeLuca's presentation, I'll provide a little bit of information about the Honors College Parent and Family Leadership Circle and answer any questions that folks might have. The PLC, or the Parent and Family Leadership Circle, meets once each term and really provides some great advice to me and the leadership team of the Honors College, supporting family engagement strategies. And then our members also support the Honors College Differential Tuition Scholarship, which is a really important scholarship fund we have to ensure that access to the Honors College is not limited by a student's financial means. So now for introductions, Dr. Tom DeLuca was named the Cheryl Ramberg Ford and Alan C. Ford Dean of the College of Forestry at Oregon State University in 2019. I don't think he was here very long before the pandemic hit, and so most of us have worked with him primarily by Zoom, although we're starting to do more and more things back in person. But he joined us from the University of Montana, where he was the Dean of the W.A. Frank College of Forestry and Conservation. And he also served as the director of the Montana Forest and Conservation Experiment Station and as a member of the governor's Montana Forest Action Council. Previous to this, he was director and professor at the University of Washington School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. And he also held positions at Bangor University in the UK, the University of Montana, the Wilderness Society, and Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania. Dean DeLuca's own research training is in forest, soil science, and ecosystem ecology, and he studied topics across the temperate, boreal, maritime, and Arctic settings with more than 120 research publications to his credit. Here at OSU, he leads one of the most respected forestry programs in the world with 6 undergraduate programs, 4 graduate programs, and about 1,300 total students. Today, he's going to talk a little bit about the work that the college is doing to contribute to a healthy planet, and then he'll be open to taking questions that you might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all today. I'm just going to share, I need a screen sharing capacity here, and then I'll try again. Great. Yeah, okay. Can you see that? And we'll go to slideshow. And you're looking at my full screen, not speaker notes or anything like that. Great. Okay. So again, thanks for the opportunity to join you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the college, but before I do so, I thought I'd give a little bit of an overview of forestry in the United States to sort of paint the backdrop for where we are today and where we're headed, and talk a little bit about our current, how the college has evolved and our current curricula, and a little bit about research and our dedication to a sustainable future, as Tony alluded earlier. So before I go, and get into the history of forestry, it's really important to recognize that these forests that the Europeans found when they arrived in the Western United States had actually been managed for millennia by indigenous peoples that were really expert users of fire. And they used it for management of lands, for protection of villages and homes, as well as for maintaining food resources. And they this little table that's on this slide shows some data from years ago from an individual in Montana, actually, Barrett and Arno, did this study where they looked at fire frequency based on paleoecological record prior to European settlement and then post. And within these areas that would have been sort of villaged areas in the Bitterroot Mountains, the fire frequency or the return interval was about 9 every 9 years. And then from about 1911 to 1980, it had that fire return interval had expanded to 26 years and now would be into the 30s. And the point there is that Native American peoples were using fire to maintain fuel loading and reduce the severity of wildfires across the United States. Today, we really struggle a lot with fire, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but it's something that we can talk about afterwards if there's interest. But the United States Forest Service, and as well as state entities, put out 97% of all fire starts here in the West. Yet it's that 3% that get away, and then we have these blow-ups of enormous fires. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But we have a lot to learn about living with fire and recognizing that it is part of our ecosystems and how they function. So just to give you a little bit of backdrop on forestry, and the establishment of forestry as a practice in the Western United States, there had been basically an approach to resource management, forest resource management in the 1700s and into the 1800s that was basically cut it and move on to the next batch because it appeared to be a limitless resource at the time. So the logging of the Pacific Northwest was sort of the last wave of that intense extractive practice of logging, just logging without regeneration. And as engineering improved for moving lumber, that really facilitated access and the rate of harvest, as well as development of tools such as the steam donkey down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Well, this led to a growing recognition that we were losing these last bits of old growth and beautiful forest ecosystems that had functioned for so many years before the logging occurred. And this really began the conservation movement in the United States to a great degree. And this quote from George Bird Grinnell: "No woods, no game, no woods, no water, no fish." So this is the hook and bullet club, so to say, or the people that were interested in wild game, recognizing that these practices were leading to the degradation of our Western ecosystems. Well, right on the heels of that, we have Charles Sprague Sargent in that same era, the chair of the National Forest Commission at the time, recognizing that the lumbermen of of Western Washington were wasteful in the extreme, and describes trees being harvested and being left to rot, and half of the bole left behind in the standing snags. And Charles Sprague Sargent was responsible for initiating the establishment of these forest reserves in the late 1800s that then led to additions by President Harrison and then President Roosevelt establishing the U.S. forest system or the U.S. National Forest Service and the U.S. National Forest Service. And then this will, of course, it expanded greatly from beyond that. But you can see that these forest reserves were established in the Western United States. And then this individual, Gifford Pinchot, was hired by Roosevelt as the first chief of the Forest Service. So it was recognized that they were going to need an army of forest rangers to maintain these forests, that they should be used as working capital, especially these that had already been logged by the lumbermen that we talked about earlier, but that it should be treated as to manage for successive crops and plan for future generations, so that a working plan was to be prepared and followed, and leaving standing trees and the young growth nearly unharmed. So, which is not how practices were done at the time. So this was new. This was conservation being enacted in the West under U.S. governance. And Aldo Leopold, who everybody on the call would be familiar with, or on this discussion today would be familiar with, was a Forest Service employee and a forest ecologist. And he described two forms of forest management. There was this notion where that land could be put into soil and function and used for commodity production, no different than producing cabbages, or it could be looked upon as biota and function in a much broader perspective, that forestry is wood and all these ecosystem services and assets, including things like recreation, water, air quality, and storage. So forestry, this concept of forestry, was really the first environmental practice under US governance on a landscape scale, or conservation practice on a landscape scale. It was turning back the tide of this extractive process and looking at ways to integrate these different values into a system. So degree programs then started to pop up across the United States, in Washington and Montana, here in Oregon, and at Yale, of course, was the very first. Actually, the very first was Cornell, and then Yale shortly on those heels, and then the first forestry degree program was established here in 1906, and then ultimately became a forestry school. And these forestry schools were geared towards managing the public lands. They were acknowledging there's all these public lands that are going to need to be managed. We're going to train all these rangers that are going to populate these ranks. And then Taft defunded the Forest Service just as it was getting underway, and some of that fell away. And instead, there was a little bit more emphasis put on proper forest engineering as well. Here at OSU, George Peavy was the first dean of the College of Forestry, and was dean of the School of Forestry, it was converted from a program to a School of Forestry in 1913. And then he actually became president of the university, then Oregon State College, from 34 to 40. And interestingly, he was also the mayor of the city of Corvallis. So I have a lot to live up to here, and I don't think I'm going to make it. I know I'm not going to be the president of the university, and I absolutely know I'm not going to be the mayor of the town. But nonetheless, it does give you something to aspire towards. Anyhow, he advanced instruction in forest sciences and really getting away, employing forestry as a conservation practice throughout the region, not in response to the cutout, get out lumbering. So this beginning of forestry as a conservation effort sort of has its ups and downs. Now, in 1910, of course, when the Forest Service was, again, just getting underway, we had the gigantic fires of 1910 in the West. And if you've read this book, Big Burn, by Timothy Egan, it spells that out really beautifully and shows how those fires actually saved the Forest Service, because it was recognized that we needed those rangers, if nothing else, to manage the forest, to minimize the potential for these fires and to be able to put out the fires. So the Forest Service got heavily into the fire prevention business. And but at that same time, the Forest Service really promoted heavy logging or heavy harvesting, on federal land from 1950s to 1970s and sort of maximize the allowable yield. And they sort of lost their moral compass a bit during that time period. At the same time, they were actively suppressing fire. As you can see, the fire retardant being dropped on Mount Sentinel there, or the clear cut in the bottom picture. The Forest Service, like I said, put out 97% of those, but it's those 3% that escape today that make up the 5 to 9 million acres of fires in the US. If you look back in time to pre-fire suppression, there was similar amounts of acreage burning, but it was burning quite differently because of the fire history and the fuel, the lower amounts of fuel accumulation in those forests at the time. Well, with the onset of greater environmental concerns for what was happening within the Forest Service on federal land, and then the establishment of the Northwest Forest Plan in the 90s, the rate of timber harvest, I have Washington State here, but the rate of timber harvest in federal lands in the West dropped really dramatically. And the net result is that these forests, once they have been entered or logged, and then they're put on a trajectory for management at that time, sort of a plantation type mentality, where you'd go into this sort of dense stand that sits on the right after so many years and do a pre-commercial thinning, and then you do a first thinning, and then you'd actually harvest after, say, 80 years in this part of Western Montana. But instead, that was abandoned, and we have this heavy fuel accumulation, or really a change in this forest structure anyhow, that is more susceptible to stand replacing fire, especially in these sort of dry forest types and mixed forest types in the inland Northwest. This just shows that management and fuels, that if you had prior management and then it burned and then it's exposed to fire versus not, that you accumulate a lot more live fuels in those that have been opened by prior logging. And it's not just the stand structure, it's also the fuel on the forest floor that accumulates in the absence of fire. And we couple that with experiencing climate change. We have a longer, hotter, drier fire seasons with climate change. Those don't increase the severity of fires necessarily, but they set the table for a greater amount of fire by having those dry conditions. And as we know, here in Oregon 2 years ago, or a year ago, in 2020, when we had these really anomalous east-west winds. So, if you have the conditions are right, you've got dry conditions, and then you have an ignition point, and you have these extreme wind events like we had, it can just absolutely blow up. And sure enough, we see that we have, with these increasingly common dry conditions with higher vapor pressure deficits, we have increasing occurrence of fire. And going hand in hand with that we have here in green fire suppression costs going up, and the actual number of fires going slightly down, but the total acreage burned increasing all across the West. So the stage is set for more fire, and that threatens both managed lands and less managed lands. But we need to learn to be adaptive and manage for resilience. So that was just a little bit of background on where we are currently with just sort of the fire situation. I didn't go into any detail on our managed lands, but this state of Oregon does an exceptional job of producing timber, and specifically Douglas fir. And there is about 23% of the forests here in Oregon are privately managed, and the vast majority is under federal land management, and very different practices between private and federal lands currently. So in terms of forestry as a profession and what's taught in forestry schools, it's really evolved over time. And of course, early on, it was that forestry schools and forestry programs taught forestry and forest science, of course, and logging engineering, and maybe some wood science and wood engineering. But they also frequently taught wildlife biology, because that, as I expressed early on, that was a really key interest in maintaining healthy forest ecosystems. And the West was to maintain especially for some, the game species. Well, over time, it was recognized that these were really important recreational landscapes, and so recreation management became more and more a part of forestry programs, a recognition of the need to understand hydrology and how to protect our water resources and manage forest landscapes. And then restoration ecology, as we recognized that some of the practices that were being employed were detrimental to the function of the ecosystem as a whole. And so we started looking at practices to reestablish more natural function and structure within forest systems. And then the really key development in the 70s into the 80s and 90s was the recognition that all these decisions that need to be made are really human decisions. And it was recognized how important the social sciences were to forest management. And that has really become key to forestry programs. We have a large number of social scientists within the faculty here in the college, along with economists and hydrologists, soil scientists, ecologists, wildlife biologists. It's a very, very diverse faculty in terms of backgrounds, but that's what's required to understand and manage forest landscapes. Oops. Oop. Sorry about that. It didn't move forward, and then all of a sudden it leaped. Okay, so today, what are the degree programs within the College of Forestry? We have, we teach a forestry degree. We have forest engineering, a combined forest engineering, civil engineering degree that's joint with the College of Engineering, obviously. We have a natural resources degree, which is exceptionally broad, and we'll talk about what that means in just a minute. Renewable materials, which is a wood science suite of wood science degrees, and then tourism, recreation, and adventure leadership. All these are undergraduate degree programs within the college. Within forestry, the degree program, it's really about how to manage forests for a variety of uses. It's not just about cutting timber for the timber resources, but that is a obviously a very fundamental and central to forestry and forest management. Human wood demand is going through the ceiling currently. It's really lockstep with population growth. And we have the capacity here in the state of Oregon to produce timber with native species and native understories. When we contrast that with most other forms of land management, for example, agriculture or plantation forest management in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, it's almost always done with exotic species. Whereas here we can maintain native forest ecosystems while producing, doing a very effective job of producing timber and wood products. We also have specializations in restoration and fire in the forestry degree program. Forest engineering is really about to design built environments of forests, so people, equipment, resources can be used effectively and safely with minimizing impact on the environment. So, and again, here it's really about, we have combined degrees with with civil engineering. So you can imagine engineering systems for the extraction of lumber in a stand that you want to protect as well as possible, protect what you intend to leave behind. And you have to build roads back into forest systems to be able to access timber. And those roads need to be built in a way that minimize impact to the environment. Renewable materials is a new name for our wood science and engineering degree programs. And it's really about the manufacturing and sale of products generated from timber. And these are carbon neutral or carbon negative structural building materials. They're the only carbon negative structural building materials on Earth, actually. And if we have time, we can talk a bit more about that in just a moment. I just did want to say that you can specialize in wood science and engineering, marketing, or art and design. We actually have an art and design option within renewable materials, and then advanced wood manufacturing. Our tourism, recreation, and adventure leadership degree is really all about those people that want to play a role in landscapes managed for recreation and outdoor opportunities, and really focused on doing so sustainably. And these you can specialize in outdoor recreation, tourism operations, adventure leadership, and ecotourism. Our natural resources degree is this really broad and flexible degree program where students are able to specialize in forest ecosystems with an emphasis on environmental protection or on forest restoration, could be on forest management, on law enforcement, fish and wildlife conservation, urban forestry, and human dimension. So it's our broadest degree program, and we have an e-campus degree offerings both at the undergrad and grad level. In terms of just what the size of, I think Tony mentioned that we're right around 1,300 students. That's about 1,000 undergraduates and 250 to 300 graduate students. And it's been slowly increasing over time, about 23% growth since 2015. In terms of experiential learning is really emphasized within the college. We try to get our students out on the ground as much as possible. And because we feel that's absolutely imperative for the professions that our students go into. And just a little bit about our research activities within the college. We, in addition to having our own research forest, we have about 15,000 acres of college research forests in the state with one being right out our back door here. So it's one of the few forestry programs that have a research forest that's literally within walking distance of campus. It's a long walk, but it's walking distance of campus. And we have all sorts of diversity of opportunities, whether you're interested in studying hydrology or soils, how forest harvest affects soil or ecosystem carbon, how wildfire affects soils and water quality and municipal drinking supplies, or how does management influence water resources and water supply and quality. Just as an example of some of the things that happen in that realm within the college. We also have geneticists that study advancement of genetic modified trees to make them more resilient to climate change, pest resistance, and wood quality. We have really focus on systems thinking within the college, and this is really taking a hold with our fire research, recognizing that fire is a natural part of ecosystem function. But now that we have humans living up into these wooded environments, we're literally trying to understand the connection between ecosystems, natural processes like fire, and developing a resilient communities and infrastructure that is adapted to these Western forest ecosystems, and fire is part of them. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving along here because I know Kevin told me around 30 minutes, and I think I'm about at that limit. So I'll just tie things up here and mention this is really a neat area of development in forestry and forest products in the last 15 years as mass timber construction. And this is where basically we engineer structural wood products out of smaller dimensional lumber to create these mega products that can displace steel and concrete in building of tall buildings or even on smaller scales. And but nonetheless, the steel and concrete represent the number 3 carbon emitter in the world today. They're great building products, but they are contributing to the carbon problem that we have with regard to climate change. And these mass timber products represent carbon neutral or carbon negative alternatives that can be built both alone or in hybrid with steel and concrete. And right now, this image here on the right is actually a 3-story building being built inside one of our buildings as one of our laboratories to do seismic testing on a mass timber structure. And this is actually going on right now. And we have the strong wall with pistons in the floor and in the wall that turn and twist and torque the building that tests its capacity to withstand those kind of seismic activity. We can use, as I said, small dimensional timber. So this means we can create an outlet for all that small diameter timber that exists in these federal forest systems that are overstocked to reduce the fire severity and increase the likelihood of being able to adapt to that fire condition and reduce the fuel loading so they're not as extreme and hard to control when they threaten communities. And we can also use it in rebuilding communities with fire hardened structures. Mass timber actually is not as flammable as stick framed or standard balloon framing of houses as we usually have. And just really briefly, we have some great study abroad programs that I won't go into in any detail right now. Also field work experience that are expected of our students to achieve during their degree programs, which really makes them stronger as an employee in terms of heading into the workforce, and gives them that hands-on experience. And then we have this brand new PV Forest Science Center that I'm standing in right now. It's a demonstration of mass timber construction. And you can see that it's just an absolute beautiful building, perhaps the most beautiful building on campus, and a great testament to what wood can do as a carbon negative structural building product. And those stairs that we're looking at there were actually recycled from the old PV hull using old glulam beams to create the stairwell, which is another story unto itself. Just a couple more images of that. That's the Red Emerson. That's the other new building that we have the testing laboratory. So my vision as incoming dean here is to reestablish forestry as a leader in conservation and catalyst for sustainability here in the Pacific Northwest, and to recapture young people's imagination and wonder around forests and forestry as a profession. And with that, I'll say thank you for the opportunity, and I'd open it up for any questions that you might have. We do engage with a wide variety of stakeholders, NGOs, agencies, and private industry. And one of the things that, as you're well aware, there's a great deal of polarization that exists in our society right now. And environmental issues is one of those. And, because of that era from the 50s to the 70s in particular, where there was really excessive harvesting in some of the federal forests in particular, sort of managing more like plantations than the diverse array of objectives that were supposed to be being met, polarized the community around forestry. And that's why I say, one of the key objectives of for me is reestablishing us in that conservation movement. We are not part of the extraction industry. We are part of the renewable industry, and we can do it here in the Pacific Northwest, as I said, with native species. But we need to really strive to continue to be better, because there are practices on the landscape today that aren't as good as they could be. And one of the things we're doing right now is we're working on the conveyance of the Elliott State Forest to create this a research forest, an 82,000 acre research forest, as a proving ground for alternative forest management practices to try to transform the way we manage more, broadly across federal, state, and private lands and tribal lands as well. And I think this will be a really unique opportunity on that front to bring together a diversity of interests in seeing endangered species recover and be delisted, as opposed to just surviving on a patch of remaining forest reserve, but trying to transform managed landscapes into being more that much more habitable for endangered species and the broadest array of species diversity. I'll just throw in one other piece of that, is that forestry is compatible with recreation. And, we don't generally recreate in for example, a wheat field or a cornfield, whereas we do in forests, and it's highly compatible with it. So that's that. One other aspect of it is just improving human health and well-being through their access to forests and forest resources, such as the McDonald Dunn here in Corvallis. So public use of those lands is a key part of what will happen at the Elliott as well. In terms of the very types of things that you were talking about are what are planned for the Elliott in terms of looking at alternative practices and as well in terms of variable retention harvesting or going back into these plantation stands and trying to put them on a trajectory that would allow them to mature out to a much more natural stand structure and function. And one of the key things that will be studied in that process is carbon storage under those different, both from an empiric perspective, collecting data over time, but also modeling it out into the future. And we've done some of that already. And some of the results are really surprising and they're encouraging. I mean, we should be able to, number one, as I said earlier, we have this increasing demand for wood products. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we should be able to meet our demands and do so in a sustainable way and do so in a way that has a minimal impact on our environment. And that is what I see as a unifying call for this college is how do we learn to do it right? Because we can't just say we're going to preserve the land and because it just pushes off that demand to somewhere else. And some of those other places are a lot more sensitive to, in terms of species extinction than even here in the Pacific Northwest. So anyhow, I don't want to labor it too much, but that's a key thing that we're intending to look at on the Elliott. It is a real problem in the industry. Historically, has been very white male dominated, and even today, as you look at forestry programs and natural resource programs across the United States, they sit around 14% diversity, which is really pretty terrible. And in terms of this college, we have been putting a significant amount of effort into changing that. The number of women in the College of Forestry now outnumber the number of men. In terms of the number of the number of female faculty within the college have increased dramatically since even 15 years ago. And these are role models for others that are coming into the profession and seeing themselves as part of the profession. We've also done a pretty good job recruiting members of BIPOC community in terms of people of color. We established a DEI plan in 2019 that we're implementing currently, and that has a significant focus on trying to diversify the faculty as well as the student body. And so we're making good ground. We've increased our, outside of international students, we've increased our diversity significantly within the college in the last 10 years. So we're moving in the right direction, but we have a really quite a ways to go yet. So, and the profession has a long ways to go. One thing I don't want to belabor it, but it was interesting. About a month ago, I got a call from a guy from Hancock Forest Products, and they said, could we get a copy of your DEI plan? Because we're trying to write one for ourselves. So that is really encouraging, that the large timber industry program or company like Hancock is taking that seriously. And so the same with Weyerhaeuser in terms of, as a mega corporation, they also recognize this is something that needs to be changed and needs to change now, and have implemented steps to push that way. And I think we're positioned well to help feed into that. So
And Tom, I'm pretty sure
Thank you,
your
Sarah.
DEI plan is on the website, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks that are interested to take a look at it. I know when it came out, it's nice. We often get information like this from all the colleges, and I remember feeling like it was a really organic process that was used to develop the plan, and I feel like it's just a really nice model. And it's clear that it's authentic and there's a commitment to it. So that's.
Yeah, there is absolutely a commitment to it. And, from prior to my arriving here, I have only, I feel at least cemented that, we shouldn't use cement as but cemented that commitment. And we are in the midst of strategic planning right now, and the DEI, having that already in place has been really valuable for the company that's working with us and trying to make sure, look at ways that we can best actuate or actualize, things that are in the plan that have been harder to implement than we might have thought.
So thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today. Really interesting.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Nice to meet you all. Bye now.